Alright, what's up guys? My name is Zack, and today I am driving a 2003 Saturn L300. Up front is a 3.0 liter V6, and down below is a 4-speed automatic transmission. Now, I am super excited to be driving this L300 because I haven't driven an L series here on the channel before. The L series started in the early 2000s and took over the more economy side of Saturn. Kind of replaced the S series sedan and S series wagon, where then the Ion replaced the S series coupe. However, I fully believe that this car is the start of the downfall of the Saturn brand. As we know, after 2009, Saturn was no more. And so today, we're going to be taking a look at a very pivotal car for the Saturn brand and taking a look back at the L300. But if you'd like to submit your own vehicle and have it reviewed here on the channel, you can head on over to my website, zackpradel.com/submit. It's a quick and easy submission form. It takes under a minute to fill out, and I come out to you. And if you'd like to see all my videos weeks or sometimes months in advance, you can head on over to my Patreon for only $5 a month. Last but not least, huge thank you to North Naperville Autos for letting me borrow this L300 for today's video. More on them towards the end, but if you'd like to browse their inventory, you can do so down in the description below. But let's get back to that 3.0 liter V6 under the hood. Well, there were two engines available here in the L300. You could get this V6, which was the nicer option, or you could spec them with the 2.2 liter inline-4 Ecotec. That engine was shared with like the Pontiac G5/Chevy Cobalt, but mostly shared with European vehicles much like this V6. And so that's kind of the start of Saturn's downfall, because they weren't using a Saturn engine anymore. Under the hood wasn't a special engine built just for Saturn. It was shared with many other platforms. Now, that on its face isn't a bad thing, and the V6 is actually quite nice. It's relatively torquey, and I would say this is a pretty good car to drive because of it. But there's some symbolism going on there that we'll talk about later on. Like I said, paired to it, 4-speed automatic. You could find these in 5-speed manual. Very, very rare. Don't know if I'll ever find one, but that was an option. You could also find the Saturn Vue SUV at the same time with the manual transmission as well. So Saturn was still doing sticks, but not for much longer. Last but not least, of course, the L300 is front-wheel drive. How does it feel to drive the L300? It's pretty basic. It does have that sort of GM rattliness as you drive it along, even though this has 56,000 miles on it. It's not anything stellar. It's a very run-of-the-mill car. And I have to say that Saturns of the past weren't these knockout driving experiences either, but this is very, very bland and basic and just didn't offer anything different than what you would have found at Chevy or Ford or Dodge even at the time. Visibility's good. I do like that, which is really, really nice. But overall, it's a very whelming experience. With that stuff out of the way, let's talk about the interior. Well, in front of me, I have 4 gauges. Off to the left is my fuel and speedometer, and off to the right is the tachometer and coolant temperature. On the steering wheel on the left and right, we have our cruise control settings. We do have a Saturn badge that has since pretty much rubbed off in the last 23 years. And you have these low slung grips, kind of encouraging a more cruiser-oriented feel. Off to the left, we do have a climate control vent, as well as our trunk release and gauge dimmer switch. And moving on to the door, we have our power mirrors, a little advanced audio speaker, and our lock and unlock. Moving into the center, we get 2 climate control vents. I'm laughing because we get a hazard switch that is just amongst a sea of dead switches. Nothing going on up here. No options found at all. And then we have our radio. We do have a cassette player as well as a CD player. Kind of a crossover era there. Does say Saturn cassette player. I like that. And it says theft deterrent. And down below we have our climate controls, temperature off to the left, fan speed in the center, and where to send it off to the right. Down below we get a cubby with a 12-volt outlet. We get the shifter in the center as well. Big, chunky, very GM parts bin shifter. Again, not what Saturn was used to, but what Saturn was going to get used to in the future. And then we have our window switches here in the center. This directly points to our friends across the pond. This is a very European thing to have window switches in the center console as opposed to on the doors. It's not to say that all European cars have this or that non-American cars don't have this, but this is kind of a tall tale sign that this is like a multi-market vehicle. to have the window switches in the center. We also have our lock and unlock. Then we do have cup holders. We will do a big friggin' bottle test, and it fails with the liner in, and when you pull the liner out, it technically does fit in, but the second the car moved, it fell over. It was a little bit too wide. So in both ways, it actually sadly fails the big friggin' bottle test. I was slightly hopeful, but at the end of the day, not quite. Then we do have a handbrake, a center console, and the seats. The seats are cloth. They're pretty nondescript. They have this very 90s pattern on them, even though this was well into the 2000s, a very early 2000s, late 90s pattern. I grew up with a lot of cars with this sort of style pattern on them when I was younger, growing up in the 2000s. So I kind of like them for that like nostalgia base. They're fine. They're holding me in the car. They're relatively comfortable enough in what I would expect out of a vehicle like this, a lower end GM product. I used to daily drive a Pontiac G6 for many, many years, and so they feel pretty similar to that. However, speaking of seats, we do have back seats. So let's go do a backseat review. All right, getting in the back of the Saturn L300. First of all, obviously that 90s, 2000s pattern carries on in the seats back here. Love to see that. And once we're inside, I'm actually pretty happy with the knee room. I know because I'm very white, I'm wearing khakis, and this interior is all tan. My box is even tan. It's kind of monochromatic for today's video, but that's okay. We do have a 12-volt outlet down here. Love to see that. We also do have a center console, two very shallow, very nondescript cup holders back here. Those are very, very strange. I feel like they're out of like iRobot or something. But overall, as you can see, a sea of beige, a sea of hearing aids, if you will. But I fit. 5'11", not a small guy. Knees have plenty of space. Head has plenty of space. So I don't know if I would enjoy riding back here because of many other reasons, but I can ride back here and I fit fine. So if you're looking to buy one of these, if you're bigger, you have bigger family members like myself, I fit back here well enough. So that is a very good sign, and I like that about the L300. Let's hop into the very back. We'll take a quick look at the trunk and cargo space, and then we'll talk about the looks. All right, so we're on the back of the L300 Saturn, and we do have a trunk popper here on the key fob, which is very, very nice, but there is a keyhole right there in case you want to use that. Those are the floor mats for the next owner. Want to keep those as tidy as we can, but once we are back here, typical GM trunk of this era, which is very, very spacious. Again, as I mentioned, I used to daily drive a Pontiac G6, and it had trunk space for days, and so that is a very similar theme here in the L300. I can pull this up as well. You do get a spare tire, which is very, very nice. No real crazy amenities for the trunk of the L300, but there you go. If you've ever been curious, that's what it looks like. Now we gotta talk about the looks, and I could take or leave the look of the Saturn L300. I don't think it's this stone cold killer. I don't think it's this red carpet model. I also don't think it's dramatically ugly. You know, GM was doing enough ugly vehicles at the time that this definitely does not take the cake for that. It also just doesn't look very Saturn-y to me. It looks very European, and again, we'll talk about that here in a second. But overall, it's just ba-ba-ba-ba-ba, you know? That's the best way I could describe it. With all of that being said, let's get on to my final thoughts. What do I think driving the Saturn L300 for the first time? Well, the actual driving experience is beyond forgettable. I don't think I'll really think about how it drives much after getting out of this car. It's almost cartoonishly boring how it is. However, I will be thinking about this car because of what it did and what it meant to the Saturn brand. So let's rewind into the late 80s, early 90s. Saturn was born from GM. They wanted something that could compete with more economical vehicles. Toyota, Honda, Mazda, Nissan were all gaining a lot of traction in the US in the 1980s, and so they sort of wanted one of those fighters. They also had Geo at the time, but that was more of a collaboration with Toyota rather than trying to face them head on. So they wanted an entry-level economy car brand. They founded Saturn, and their whole slogan was a different kind of company. And they went hard in the paint. They immediately built a brand new factory just for Saturns in Tennessee. They decided to not incorporate Saturn with like GMC, Buick, and Chevy dealers. They went and built their own brick and mortar. They also went out and designed their own brand new engine, the 1.9 liter inline 4, that they use throughout the S series, which is great, but that's all a lot of money. It's a lot of money to build a factory. It's a lot of money for R&D on a new engine. It's a lot of money to build new dealerships and do their own marketing besides just slotting them in with an existing brand. So Saturn spent a lot of money, and when you're an economy car brand, you don't bring in a whole lot of money. And so while the 90s Saturn S series was pretty iconic, and I've driven a lot of them, they're lovely cars, they're unique cars, they're great, they never really fully recovered from their huge initial investment. And so in the 2000s, GM decided to somewhat consolidate Saturn and start incorporating European parts from their Opel division into the designs of this car. And so this shares a lot of parts with the Opel. We got the Saturn Astra that was literally a rebadged Opel Astra here in the States. That engine is a European derivative. The window switches are in the center, very European. Because GM had a pretty good 90s and 80s overall, they bought up a lot of brands, and so they were venturing into the European market. And while for the first time in a long time, Saturn was actually starting to make the company some money because they had consolidated costs, Saturn lost their soul. They were no longer these sort of one-off, on their own, special little vehicles. They were just rebadges, and it just got worse throughout the 2000s, to the point where Saturn didn't really have much identity left. And when it didn't have much identity left, GM didn't really feel any remorse for pulling the plug. And so this car in front of me isn't an inherently bad car. The L300 isn't awful. Sure, it had reliability issues and wasn't very popular, but it's not an awful automobile. But what it did and what it signified was the end of Saturn. They didn't know it at the time, but it was on the horizon once this car hit our shores. And that, to me, is sad, because I love Saturn. I loved Saturn when it was around, and now it's nothing but a memory. I keep filming Saturns. I love filming Saturn for the sole purpose of posterity, for the sole purpose of just keeping their memory around, keeping their image around, because everything, people, companies, ideas die twice. When they originally die, and then when they stop being talked about. And so I will do my best to continue to talk about Saturn until I can't anymore. And the L300 is an important part of that story. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Huge thank you to North Naperville Autos for letting me borrow their L300 for today's video. They've been absolutely wonderful to work with. I've worked with them for years and years and years. They always have cool and interesting vehicles on their lot. I'm so appreciative of them, so please go check them out with the link down in the description below. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to rate the video, comment on the video, and subscribe if you really liked it. Take care, guys.